Okay, so one of the frameworks on how your group is going to interact with your client organization in this class, um, we use a framework called the Mission Model Canvas. And I want to explain that framework to you over a series of short lectures, so that you have an idea of how you might use this framework as you interact with your clients and as you begin to look at solutions that you might suggest to those clients. So I want to go over the framework for what we call a mission model canvas. Now, to preface this, some of you may have taken some other entrepreneurship classes where you learned a framework called the business model canvas, the BMC. Um, we use this in entrepreneurship all the time as a way to help students and entrepreneurs conceptualize how their business would run, and then ultimately run tests to refine a business model around a business idea. Well, the mission model canvas is going to be an adaptation of the business model canvas. So let me do a short presentation on that, and we'll go from here. So let me share my screen. It'll take me a minute or two to bring up the presentation. Okay, so this presentation focuses on certain aspects of the mission model canvas. For those of you familiar with the business model, um, the framework looks exactly the same, only some of the elements are going to be different. Here, instead of customer segments, you'll see beneficiaries. Here, instead of customer relationships, we're going to talk about buy-in and support. Down here, instead of channels, we're going to talk about deployment. And over here, instead of revenue streams, we're going to talk more about mission achievement and impact factors. So, um, let's proceed with this. Now, first, I have assigned to you this particular reading, and it's in your syllabus, but you can also access it here. And I bring this to your attention. Um, this is an overview of the mission model canvas that will give you a high level sense. So be sure you read through it, because I'll probably pull some questions from it on our upcoming exam. Um, but back to the canvas. So as I mentioned, it is an adaptation of the business model. It's focused. The reason why we had to make these changes is because a business tends to be profit and revenue driven, but that's not the case for certain organizations, such as the military or other government kind of organizations, where this framework might make more sense. So we're going to start off um, with the first element called beneficiaries. Um, so beneficiaries are what we call the end users. Now, these are going to be your clients who can ultimately benefit from your solution. These are the ones that wrote the problem statement that you're currently working on. These could be military personnel, or whoever, or maybe they're in the military, but they're doing HR functions or other administrative functions, such as keeping track of assets, military assets, and deploying those assets, or keeping track of flight logging, which is, I know, one of our projects. So it's going to be important for you to identify your the key beneficiaries who might benefit from your project. So towards this end, I asked you to watch this short Steve Blank video. So we're going to watch it now and then talk about it for a few minutes.
So what is ClickUp? ClickUp is an all-in-one productivity software where you can manage everything and anything related.
So if you're in the defense and intelligence community, the beneficiary seems obvious. It's the warfighter in the field, or it's an analyst in front of a screen, or it's a cyber operator about to issue an execute command. But it turns out that in the DoD and intelligence community, it's a lot more complicated than that. There's almost always multiple layers and levels of beneficiaries and stakeholders and customers that you need to consider. So other beneficiaries might be the contracting officer, or the requirements writers, or the acquisition folks, or legal, or the people who read the analyst reports, or different levels in the chain of command. On day one, you're more than likely to start with the people you're most familiar with. But as you start talking to these people, you'll realize that they're connected to a much bigger ecosystem. During this process, you're going to have to discover who all they are, because you're also going to discover one other type of user that if you don't know about, your product is never going to be deployed. And that's what we call the saboteur. And the saboteur isn't an adversary, at least an external one, but it's somebody with potential vested interest to make sure your product and service doesn't see the light of day. Is it because it disrupts analysts' work that they've been doing on a continuous basis for the last 15 years? Is it a warfighter who's been traditionally using weapon X or Y, and now you're going to automate that process with robotics or something else? Or is it a prime who has a multi-billion-dollar contract and you're now proposing a swarm of much cheaper products and services? So particularly in DoD and IC, not only do you need to figure out the stakeholders and beneficiaries, but who are all the people who wouldn't want it? And your goal is not to steamroller them, but to figure out how to actually get them to appreciate what it is you're going to offer. So ultimately, how you deal with saboteurs depends on how large of an obstacle they are and how agile and adroit you are in actually making them partners rather than obstacles. One of the things we're going to do a bit later is to actually build something called the value proposition canvas for each beneficiary and stakeholder, actually describing what's the pain and gain that each one of those stakeholders and beneficiaries you've discovered actually have. And we're going to figure out what is it in something called the value proposition that solves those pains and gains. So next, let's talk about value proposition.
Okay, so in your case, the beneficiaries are your primary contact, with that wrote the problem statement, and it really is going to be your challenge to try to really understand what the problem is and what are they really trying to accomplish. So I put together some sample questions that you might want to ask when interacting with your primary contact. Who will be the primary users of your solution? So the person who wrote up the problem statement, I want you to think about who are ultimately going to be the users and how are they currently addressing the problem? As I mentioned earlier, sometimes they're already have something in place that may not be adequate for some reason or another. I go back to the flight logging example. In that case, they are doing something to manage flight hours, but it seems to be cumbersome for them. So How are they currently addressing the problem? And so I want all of you to be thinking about that. And what specific pain points or challenges are they facing? So what is the nature of the problem? First, try to understand what it is they're trying to do and what are the pain points. And if you come up with an appropriate solution for them, whether you come up with a customized solution or a COT solution, start thinking about how will your solution improve the workflow or mission readiness. So these are some questions that you can begin to try to formulate as you get to know your client a bit better.